just proceed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us yet another morning for the third edition of the annual conversation. Today we'll be looking into the future. For the last 2 weeks, we've looked at the impact of COVID-19 on retirement benefit schemes and on investments. But now we are asking the question, what options are there for us, even in the future, as we navigate through this? So we'll be looking in the future in terms of regulatory scheme framework for the retirement benefit schemes, employee benefits management, even in the future, and then post-COVID-19 investment opportunities. What can we do to start preparing ourselves for that? And we have a great panel of experts lined up to take us through these topics. Just for engagement and so that you are all able to participate, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function. If you have any question during the presentation, please feel free to write it down there, and we'll try to make sure that we've addressed all of them. We have the raise hand function. I see Mr. John Sita has already raised his hand. Please feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak, and then we'll give you an opportunity to speak at the end of the presentations. We'll try to have as many as you speaking. Kindly keep your mics on mute unless you're speaking, so that at least we are all able to hear the presenters. And then just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube pages later on, and we'll share with you the link if you need to refer. Additionally, just 1 second. I think now there's already one person who needs to be put on mute. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Additionally, we request you to follow the conversation on our social media platforms. On Facebook, we are nWealth Kenya, on Twitter at nWealth Kenya, and LinkedIn nWealth Financial Services. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. It's Mr. David Nyakundi Bonyi. He's a pension law and regulation expert. Just by way of introduction, David Nyakundi is a pension law and regulation expert with a wealth of experience spanning over 22 years. He has a wide experience in licensing and governance requirements of pension schemes and pension service providers, including scheme administrators. David is an advocate and a member of the bar in Kenya, and is currently practicing law and heading pension law practice. He's also former CEO, Uganda Retirement Benefits Authority, so he really does understand the pension industry, and he'll be taking us through the future of the retirement benefits industry, especially with the changes in regulation. So David, welcome. You may say hi as I share your presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, we can hear you very well.
It's my privilege to have this discussion with your host this morning. And wherever you are, each participant, you are most welcome to this discussion. We are living at very interesting times because of COVID-19. Probably nobody here last year expected such a situation, but now all of us are in it, and we need to continue surviving even within the retirement benefit sector. I'm going to do some highlights on what this means to the pensions industry, and in particular, the funding requirements and, of course, remittance of contributions to the pension funds, especially now that we know most employers are being hit hard in terms of businesses and making of profits and money for purposes of running their institutions. Next slide. We can go to the next slide. Now, I wouldn't discuss much about the employment contracts. Miriam is going to discuss more about what COVID-19 means to employment, and we shall have some more discussions over that during the Q&A. But under the employment contract, the relationship between the employer and the employee is established, and this is very much guarded under the Employment Act. And one of the things which is becoming now very clear is that pension rights form part of employment terms of engagement. before 1991 in UK, where we have borrowed much of our pension industry, the issue was that pensions were gratuitous. It was a gift of the employer to the employee, and it never formed part of employment terms. Now, I just want to indicate that now under the Employment Act, the employer is supposed to, among other terms of engagement, to provide particulars which relate to the pensions to an employee. Section 10(5) of the Employment Act makes it clear that you will not be able to change those terms without some consent between the employer and the employee. Now, I just want to go back to the slide which deals with a case in South Africa. That is slide 8, which ruled that pension is part of remuneration of an employee and forms part of the employment contract, which can only be changed with consultation between the parties to that contract. And I've seen similar decisions in UK recently, where a court also ruled that if there's a valid contract between the employer and the employee providing for reduction of future service benefits, then this will be binding on the pension trust and the scheme trustees. Again, which re-emphasizes the point that for you to change any of these terms of engagement, which now include pensions, then some level of negotiation and agreement has to be reached. If you go to slide 9, the Retirement Benefits Act and regulations has a number of provisions which govern the question of contributions. The obvious ones which most of us know is Section 40, which requires that remittances pension scheme in terms of contributions to report to RBA within, if it's late for more than 30 days. Section 53A(1) actually has a very interesting statement, which says deductions of an employee contributions are premised on an agreement between the employer and the employee, and therefore, if you deduct, you cannot fail to remit because you have already deducted money from an employee, and which is a basis of your employment contract. Failure to remit constitutes an offense under that section. And that's why in Section 53B of RBA Act, RBA has got these immense powers to recover and remit contributions from the employer, of course, beside other sanctions which have been provided for in that section. Now, what I read from the Retirement Benefits Act is that RBA envisages prompt contribution remittance, and employers should always remember that these contributions form part of the agreement which you have entered into with your workers, and therefore you cannot hold it back. The next slide gives us some provisions in the occupational schemes regulations about contributions. If you look at the definition, which is in Regulation 3 of a scheme, basically an occupational scheme, it's a scheme established by the employer for the benefit of employees, again, bringing into board the employment contract. In fact, in South Africa, another case, the court ruled the rules of a pension fund were indeed part and parcel of employment, the relationship between the employees and the bank. So all the time it's important for employers to remember that providing a pension scheme to workers constitutes part of the whole package of employment. The question which some lawyers do ask, especially I've seen the Pension Lawyers Forum in South Africa, is will this be true if the employment contract was silent on the question of pension benefits? This will vary, in my view, from country to country. In Kenya, because of Section 10 of the Employment Act, every employer must provide particulars of a pension scheme to the workers, and then it constitutes part of employment. So in Kenya, there's no way that a situation where an employment contract will ignore pension rights, because it's a requirement now that you have to make a clear disclosure of that to all the employees that you have. If you look at the next slide, which is Regulation 16 of the Occupational Schemes Regulations, or maybe 14, let's look at Regulation from time to time. Although the regulation doesn't say the circumstances under which revisions can be made, the only point which we must for the interest of members. So, and therefore, the need for consultation when critical, because as I've indicated, this constitutes part of the employment contract. And the next slide, which is 16, Regulation 16 of the Occupational Schemes Regulations, is the old common rule that we know, that the powers to amend schemes do exist between the employer and the trustees. They can always amend those rules. And under the circumstances under which we live, some trustees, I'm sure, have been tempted to say, do we amend regulations so that we can suspend or reduce contributions? Do we amend to delay or suspend the notice of termination of contributions? All those powers do exist under Regulation 16. And therefore, any decision that you come to as you amend the rules, which will affect in one way or another the remittance of contributions, which of course will affect the benefits which people expect when they retire, it's always important that you consult the members before that decision is made, because if that doesn't happen, it becomes a fertile ground for legal questions after this COVID-19. Another rule which some trustees will be thinking about, which is in the next slide, that is Regulation 7 of the Winding Up Regulations. Next slide. Now, the power to terminate the scheme do exist, and that is governed under the Winding Up Regulations, in particular Regulation 7. The procedure is clear, and the regulation requires that the scheme rules provide that procedure. So if you look at your trust deed and rules, there's a termination clause. Now that clause gives power to the employer to cease remittance of contributions. Once that happens, trustees have options. They can actually run that scheme as a closed fund. They can choose to wind it up on a voluntary basis upon the issuance of that notice from the employer. So currently what the employers are facing is that if the notice is for 6 months, can you also waive the remittance of contributions for that period of 6 months? And the answer probably is no. If you issue a notice under the Winding Up Regulations, then you may have to be liable as an employer to continue remitting contributions for the period of notice. And trustees after that will have a discretion whether to wind up the scheme or have it wound up. Now, what options therefore do you have as an employer, as trustees, and what are the rights of the members? First and foremost, because of the situation in which we are in, all of us, the sponsor needs to analyze the situation and determine the extent to which you have been affected currently because of COVID-19. One of the things which employers are talking about is the cash flow problem what's going to happen to the funding and the contributions of the scheme. After that, decide what to recommend to trustees as what is going to work for you as an employer. Now, the second thing, therefore, is as employers and trustees need to come together and consult, which means you must hold a meeting, present your proposals as a sponsor to the trustees, look at the covenants which the trustees have and the employers have in the trust deed, and jointly agree on what is best for the scheme under the current circumstances. It's important to know that the circumstances each employer is facing at the moment could be different from one company to the other, and therefore you need to be specific to your own institution and decide what is going to work for you. Everything that you do under the circumstances must be in writing so that you are able to deal with issues later which arise, because people will ask for documents, for resolutions, and all that. Number 3, in the next slide, you may decide to reduce or suspend contributions because of the cash flow problems. And this is going to be on a temporary basis. Of course, because it is temporary, the suspension of the contributions will not mean that you are going to terminate the scheme. The sponsor will then need to communicate to the employees of the agreed position between the trustees and themselves. Why? Because it's the sponsor who has an obligation to change the terms of employment, not the trustees. It is the sponsor who has an obligation to deduct and remit contributions. It is the sponsor's obligation under the covenants in the trust deed who has the duty to remit those contributions. So that's why, in my view, the right person to engage with the members on this question is the employer as part of the terms of engagement. How do you communicate? Now, again, this will vary from one employer to the other. Some small employers with all the staff, you can reach on quickly through a communication or a letter to them. You can do a letter. But where you have large employees, you may wish to do a one standard circular to all the employees, which you can send to them electronically with a clear indication in the circular whether that all of you are deemed to have accepted this content of the circular, except if any one of you is objecting, then that person has to submit his or her objection in writing to the employer. So that if there's nobody saying no, then it will be deemed to have been accepted by all the employees, and that's what you're going to submit to RBA. Of course, number 4, you have the option of amending the scheme rules so that you can do what you have decided. The only challenge with amending scheme rules now, you may not have the time to complete it in time because of the impact which is still going on under the COVID. And this may not therefore sound like it's an emergency from RBA point of view. It may take long to secure an approval. And of course, employee consultation will still be required. The word there is employee consultation. The other option is some people may be tempted to cease the scheme, in fact, to bring it to an end, wind it up. The requirement is to issue the notice under the termination clause, and notice usually is about 6 months. Now, the challenge with that, the impact is still going on under COVID. You may not have all that time, and the notice may not be waived. I've seen the RBA communication, which has said if all the employees, the trustees, and the employer agree in writing and do an affidavit, you can actually waive the notice period for purposes of termination. Of course, that's going to take a bit of time, but that option does exist if you want to terminate the scheme. Now, the next point, therefore, you will have to do is to communicate to RBA. RBA has now invited all the schemes who have a challenge to communicate to them in their third communique, which is now with all the schemes. What you have agreed between the 3 parties, the employer, the employee, and the trustees, you put it down in proper writing and then communicate to RBA. Of course, you will need to attach the various resolutions which will support your case. a copy of the communication to the employees or the members. And if there's an objection from an employee, that has to be attached together with the decision you have made. You may wish to make a decision on what to do with those who object. That decision will need to be attached. And there are some instances where RBA has said you may need to sign an affidavit between the sponsor and the trustees to show that you actually communicated to the members and consulted with them and they agreed. Let me conclude so that I can deal with your questions and answers. COVID-19 is still evolving, and I'm sure we have probably not seen the end of it. And it has various impacts on the scheme. Look at scheme administration. I'm sure NWorld has reduced its staff in the office, if there's any in the office. There's going to be delayed preparation of statutory documents, responses to the members, suspension of AGMs, even that has been communicated by RBA. I think my advice is that maintain an appropriate and a fair approach under the circumstances. Invest in business continuity plans, which I'm sure most of the schemes are doing, and service providers, and trustees to state the priorities to administrators under the circumstances. What is the best to do under the circumstances, so that some things which are not so important, you don't have to prioritize them. On the next slide, under the service level agreements, service providers, there's a clause which has to do, which deals with force majeure. I mean, what some people call acts of God, things which are difficult to handle under the circumstances. And some of the service providers are going to invoke this clause for non-performance of some contractual obligations, especially investments. I think my advice on this is that study the clauses, hold meetings, and agree with service providers on what to do under the current circumstances, so that you limit your legal issues after COVID. And finally, on scheme governance, which is also impacted, meetings, you need to agree on how to hold your meetings. Now I think everybody seems to be going electronically. And if this is going to work for you, I think you better continue your meetings electronically as trustees. Review your quorum if that's an issue because of this style of meeting, the formalities of meetings, and how you want to proceed with the meetings, and how you want to record your minutes and execute your various documents. You may wish to have some of the executions done electronically, and also decide on how you are going to communicate to your members. What is critical now, which I want to close with, pay very close attention to everything, prioritize, and always remember to communicate to RBA. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, sir. I can already see that we have a few questions in the Q&A platform. I'll request the participants to use that and also raise your hand. But before we answer the questions, I'll invite my colleague, Opa Wanyama, to just share briefly highlights from the RBA communique that was sent earlier this week that addresses changes in light of the COVID situation. Opa is an advocate of the High Court, and she's also a manager in charge of legal and compliance at NWorld Financial Services. Opa, if you may please go ahead and share your presentation so that you can take all the questions that are good. Opa, can you hear me? Okay, as we wait for her, maybe I can we can respond to one question, Mr. Nyakundi. I have one question here by Peter Ngoto. He asks, if members or trustees refuse to agree to a proposal to reduce or suspend pension contributions, what will happen?
Good question, thank you so much. My view is that once you receive an objection from a member, trustees must sit down and agree together with the employer must sit down and agree that this is a term of engagement. The circumstances under which we are operating will not support the current contributions unless we reduce them or suspend them, and put it down in writing, and that is what you will communicate to RBA. Okay. Now, what is likely to happen at the end of this? A member may say, my benefits were reduced unfairly, and you will be able to defend that matter under the circumstances, because the question of force majeure does not apply to even other contracts. It may apply even to a relationship like this one. If it is not possible at all to pay or to have money to pay, you can always rely on that in a matter of law in court and demonstrate from your cash flow that you are not able to do what the member wants. So it's a matter of meeting down with the other directors and agree on what to do with all those people who object. My view is that they may be fewer than the majority.
All right, thank you, sir. Hope I see you've joined us. Please go ahead with your presentation. Then we'll take the rest of the questions. Opa, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Bansi.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good morning, participants. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. And thank you, Mr. Nyakundi, for that very informative presentation. I'd like to take the participants on through the RBA community that came through on the page with RBA to understand what measures they have put in place to try and cushion the sector in as far as the schemes are concerned. Okay, the first measure that RBA put in place was on the waiver of penalties accruing for late. Remember that schemes to remit are supposed to file their audited accounts within 3 months after the end of the financial year. But due to the pandemic, RBA, through the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning, the same has been extended by at least 60 days to ensure that schemes are and leeway for the not able to file their audited accounts within the speculated timelines to be able to pay the RBA levy, which is payable every year and based on the fund value of the scheme, to use the financials for the previous year, that is 31st December 2018, to be able their RBA levy. And they further guide that in case there is an overpayment, then the overpayment would be credited on the scheme's accounts and might be used for the financial year. And in case of an underpayment, then what happens is that RBA will not levy a penalty of the deficit. On the Trustee Development Program, which is popularly known as TDPK, the same has been postponed. We all know that trustees are supposed to be trained within a specific time, which is 6 months from the date of appointment. However, RBA has postponed that so that for the period within which we have uncertainty of the COVID-19. So if you are a trustee and, for example, you've been appointed as a trustee with effective 1st January, the 6 months start running on the 1st of January 2020, but there will be a stay within from April when the RBA sent out the communique, and then we pick it up from when the suspension is lifted. On the issue of good governance, we all know that the schemes that are, the fund values are above 5 billion are supposed to comply with the guidelines which came through on sometime in October 2018 by 30th of June. But due to the pandemic, RBA is a bit lenient, and if schemes are not able to comply, then a communication is supposed to be given to the Retirement Benefits Authority outlining the difficulties that the schemes might be having. On matters compliance in as far as AGMs and Board of Trustees meetings are concerned, the trustees may, that is, the word is may, postpone their annual general meetings and reschedule their Board of Trustees meeting if need be. But if you can use trustees, if you can hold your meetings through the online platform, then it is advisable to do so, so that we can also try and be compliant in as far as this aspect is concerned. I know during this period, there would be trustees, there would be boards of trustees would have terms of trustees lapsing and rendering some of the schemes non-compliant in terms of constitution of the Board of Trustees. In such an instance, the Retirement Benefits Authority has guided that you should reach out to the authority for further guidance on how to deal with the situation, because each scheme might have a different issue from the other. So it is advisable to communicate to the Retirement Benefits Authority on that. I wouldn't want to touch more on contributions because my very able senior has touched on that. But just for your comfort, RBA has given directive on matters of contribution in terms of suspension of contributions, in terms of varying the contribution rates, and as well as discontinuance of contributions by employer. This is of course putting into consideration the hard times that the employers might be having during this pandemic. The RBA further is open to any question, any issues that may arise during this pandemic, and they encourage that each scheme that may be having an issue to communicate to them on case-by-case basis as the issues may arise. Thank you. I hope I've put it clear to each one of you for you to be able to understand. And we continue to assist you in case you have issues and you need further guidance on the communique from the Retirement Benefits Authority. The administrators are willing and ready to assist. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both, our learned friends. I'll now request the participants, if you have a question, please raise your hand. We have a few minutes for this, and then I'll allow you to speak. In the meantime, there's another question here that asks, so does it mean that schemes cannot declare interests because of the effect of the pandemic? Schemes need to style up and move on with times. Members need to know their interests. I think this must be a member. If the stay home goes on, so will there be no interest declared? So it's a question of interest. So we will be declaring interests even in the midst of the pandemic. Mr. Nyakundi or Opa, please feel free to chime in.
Okay. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
The investments of schemes will continue. I think this was discussed a week or so ago. The situation notwithstanding, and therefore, at the end of the financial year of the scheme, there will be a declaration of interest. Now, I guess the questioner is wondering how that return will look like. Of course, from RBA and other players in the market, they have obviously seen that it's going to be a dip in terms of returns. So the declaration of interest will be what the market will avail at that period. So the answer is that yes, there will be a declaration of interest. It's a requirement to declare that interest at the end of the year. The question is, how do you deal with a lowly declared interest to members? That will require communication from trustees and a continuous communication from the employer as the effect of COVID-19 on the performance of various pension funds.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Peter, I see you've raised your hand. I'll allow you to talk. Please unmute your speaker and ask your question.
Thank you, Bansi. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My question goes to Bwana David Nyakundi, who has really given us a very good presentation. Since the RBA has postponed the training, trustee development training program. And any trustee who comes in must have been certified after going through that program. What will happen now, or that the terms of most of trustees are coming to an end? Is there going to be a stay of the requirement that the terms of trustees who are now in office at this particular moment be extended? Then the other one is that we have what we call AGMs have also been postponed. And in AGMs, that is where members are informed the status of the scheme. And it means now we are not able to hold these AGMs because of this coronavirus issue. So in the event that we don't hold this AGM this year, and maybe we'll be holding it next year, what will happen to the members' terms? So could there be some also adjustments or maybe deferment of some of these regulations by RBA? On elections, again, it is a cost thing because it's a very expensive exercise. So at this time, when schemes are not getting good returns from investments, are we still going to have those elections to have new trustees in office? So what do you think about that?
Okay, thank you, Peter. I think I'll read two more questions that Mr. Kanyakundi can answer both of them. So the next question is that there's an issue of accessing pension funds for mortgage. I think there's new legislation to that effect. So how will we handle this, and how will it affect the pension industry? And then Frederick Orlando asks, regarding the pooled funds, the declaration of interest will be based on which market index? So if you can answer those, I think 4 questions, then we'll move
on. Thank you so much. I'll ask someone to deal with question 5 on the index that is applicable to pooled funds. But on question 1 regarding TDK postponement, if you look at the communication from RBA and in particular paragraph 4, it postpones that training, and this will be revisited once the situation normalizes. So that should be understood. Now, regarding the new trustees who must be TDK qualified, my understanding is that in view of this communication from RBA will not begin to deny permission of a member to be, a person to be a trustee of the scheme on account of not having been trained under this trustee development training program. In fact, if you look at that communication from RBA, they say any issue which you don't know what to do, communicate to RBA and they'll give you guidance. And I think my understanding is that they will not say no trustee because he has not been able to be trained. Now, with AGM's postponement, how do you communicate to the members? One of the things which trustees must learn to do in this situation is to come up with ways on how to communicate with the members. Either you do a WhatsApp group or you do Zoom or whichever, all these channels which are available, we need to explore so that we can be able to communicate to the members. Of course, there's the old traditional way of doing letters, but that's going to be a very long way of communicating. I will urge trustees to start thinking on how to reach out to their members whenever they want to pass information to them. So that if you want to communicate about interest and performance of the scheme, then you need either to have a website or you come up with some digital communication which can be able to reach to many members as possible. And RBA will understand under the circumstances. If some people who cannot be able to access any information by reason of where they live or stay, RBA will understand all this. Elections, one of the things that we have talked about is about the expiry of term of trustees around this time, requiring elections. Now, if you are not able to do that, you better communicate to RBA quickly. That's what they have said. And they will be able to give you guidance on what to do. There's a question as to whether actually, if an expired term of a trustee can be extended by RBA. That's a question of law, and we'll have to wait and see how RBA communicates about that. Probably you may have to think about quorum of those who remain to continue running the scheme until the situation normalizes. But what is critical from RBA here, communicate to RBA whenever you have this challenge, and they'll be able to give you guidance. Now, the new development under the Tax Amendments Bill Act, which now came into force 2 days ago, Section 38 of the Retirement Benefits Act has been amended to allow your pension savings not only to be used as mortgage for getting a house, a residential home, but also to buy a house. So which means you can actually transfer your money from your pension fund to the seller of the house and you'll acquire a house. Now this RBI, I know at the moment is coming up with the regulations to implement this so that it is properly governed. But certainly it's gonna have an impact in the sector in terms of the value of the assets in the industry. I do believe middle income earners currently who are serving in various pension funds in the country and who are paying rent may wish to buy their own homes using their pension funds without necessarily looking for a mortgage. And therefore, if that is not properly managed, then of course we see a lot of cash flow from the scheme to the sellers of houses in the market. So there's an impact in terms of asset base. Some schemes may actually reduce a substantial amount of money, but let's wait and see on the regulations which RBI will come up with for purposes of managing this provision.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Simon, I don't know whether you want to chime in on the issue of the
Port fund and which index to apply.
Yes, interests. But if you're not ready, I think what we'll do, because we'll be looking at investments later, led by Anthony from ABSA, I think we'll defer that question to a later time.
Maybe Nancy, I can comment.
Go ahead.
So every year, schemes go through an audit, and trustees approve audited financial statements, and the income earned as which is audited is then allocatable to the members based on the income allocation policy adopted by the trustees. And so trustees, COVID-19 or no COVID-19, the investment income earned as of December 2019 for schemes whose financial year end is December 2019. Members are still entitled to statements and also interest credit. And I'm sure through their service providers, the administrator and the trustees, that is actually happening. So the investments mainly which might be affected is this year, but it's still far too early to speculate. And I'm sure also Anthony is going to comment a little bit. That's why we have the next, we have the fund manager commenting on this. Nancy, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. So as we go into the next presentation, that will be looking at the future of work. What impact do we expect on employment? You might see a poll on your screen. I'll request you to just quickly fill that for me. So for those who are employed, what initiatives has your organization adopted to try and adapt to the current situation? So are you on annual leave? Are there people sent on unpaid leave? Do you have salary cuts? Are there positions declared redundant? Are you facilitating transport for people working, coming to the office, or facilitating internet access for people working from home, or none? Is it business as usual? Then the second question is, how would you rate your overall satisfaction with the implemented initiatives? So are you very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, neutral, or very dissatisfied with the initiatives the organization has taken up? Give us a minute to just answer that, and then we'll proceed to the next presentation, which will be handled by Miriam. So 20 seconds for those. I see half of us have completed the survey, so another 20 seconds. All right, I'll end the survey and I'll just share the results. I think you can see them on your screen. So majority of us, we are being facilitated by our employer to work from home. I hope it's going on well for you as you're working from home. And then interestingly, most of us are very satisfied with the initiatives that have been taken up. So thank you for the feedback. I want to go ahead and introduce our second speaker. Just 1 second. And Miriam Wamboi is the founder and executive director of Scope and Impact. She leads the People, Strategy and Results Division for East Africa region. She's an accomplished human resource and business leader who is recognized for delivering results and solutions, driving change in complex and dynamic environments, and developing high-performing teams. Miriam spends time helping organizations implement their strategies successfully and realize their full potential. So welcome, Miriam. Miriam will be taking us through the future of employee benefits management. Karibu.
Thank you, Bansi. I would like you to allow me to share my screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so I assume that this screen is sharing, Bansi.
I can't see it from my end.
Just 1 second. Share screen.
Yeah, we can see it now.
You can?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bansi, and well done, Mr. Nyakundi. That was a very good presentation that you did ahead of us, and to Olpa as well. Thanks for enlightening us. So I'll take a couple of minutes just to go through the future, what we are calling future. But actually, in my view, this is a presentation that I did about 4 years ago, still speaking about future. You can see that from about 4 or 5 years ago, we were already speaking about the future of work and anticipating that certain things would happen that would cause employers and employees to come to the table and discuss things like benefits and how work would generally be performed and how contracts of employment would be managed. So in my view, I think that future we have been talking about is now. We are not looking at another future. It is now. So the first thing that I want to start by saying is employers and employees are in that space where I would like to propose that we enter into work relationship as a relationship of trust and not as a battlefield. You see, so many things are going to change going forward, and COVID-19 is just one of them. It is just one of the many disruptions that are going to be coming up. But we are, I guess, in that situation where COVID-19 has stolen the show now. But looking into the future, I think there will be so many other things. In this country, we have seen locusts. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know about locusts and why they are here, and even when they're going to go away. We're going to see there's a lot of floods going on now. People are getting displaced. COVID-19 is the other thing. And we know very well that in Africa generally, also politics tends to play a big role in what happens in our places of work. So in my view, I think that the conversation that we should be putting on the table should look to change certain policies and how the employer-employee relationship should be entered into from now going into the future. And that being my opening statement, I then want to build a bit of context into what I'm going to be speaking about in the next couple of minutes. Now, when we speak about benefits, I get the impression from a lot of employers and employees that we mix up these three things. We mix up compensation, reward, and benefit, and we think everything here is one item. But from where I sit as a HR practitioner, these three items should be separated and handled very separately. Even in the contract of employment, these things must be separated as such. And in fact, in the Employment Act, how it was drafted, it was envisaged these things would be itemized as such. So you will see that there's a clear guidance on the Employment Act on how an employment contract should look like with itemization of these things one by one. I'm sure the experts in law like Mr. Nyakundi and Opa would agree to that. Now, what is compensation? Compensation is equal pay for equal work. And this is the minimum threshold. I mean, this is what all of us go to work for. This is what you put on the table when you're discussing how you're going to enter into an employment relationship with whoever you're hiring. Now, there's something else that we call reward. Now, reward, just like the name suggests, is recognition for exceptional achievement. So it's something that it's the carrot. It is not something that is expected that you should be giving, but something that an employer would use to encourage that because see there is benefit in doing exceptional work. So it's the carrot. But benefit is, it suggests that it's well-being or advantage. Now, for a very long time, as I practiced HR, we used the term benefit to say that this is how we attract and retain our employees. But going into the future, I see this term changing to mean that it is actually sustainability. It is looking to bring your people on board and really thinking, how is this relationship going to be sustainable even under the very strenuous circumstances like we are seeing now with COVID-19. So up to now, I hope that I have clearly described what is the difference between compensation, reward, and benefit. Now, moving on, I want to very quickly take us through how traditionally organizations built their benefit mix, or what we call the traditional mix of compensation, reward, and benefits, and what it was based on. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is probably what most of us have in our organizations. I know in this forum, I am speaking to employers, I am speaking to employees. So this is possibly what you have in your organization, and it is what you're calling your benefit structure. So you, under compensation, you would have basic pay, and some organizations do have allowances. In your reward space, you will have things like annual bonuses. Some companies do holidays and trips, training and education. Some organizations even go ahead and give club membership. Now, under the benefit space, and this is where pensions come in, healthcare, which is what most of us call the medical schemes, the life insurance, WIBA, club membership again, training, and low interest loans. But how did we get here? I think this is a familiar triangle to most of us. We got here because there was something called the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and most employers are cognizant of this hierarchy, where we knew that for every human being to be able to survive and perhaps even thrive comfortably, you need to meet very basic things like food, water, warmth, rest, security, safety, and intimate relationships, and so on and so forth. But I am now introducing another concept, which is really what we are looking at and saying, we're going into the future. Is this a sustainable way of looking at our benefits? I heard in one of the questions, I think in the earlier presentation, somebody said, we need to stop being very rigid and we need to embrace the future. And that future is what I would like us to spend 2 minutes talking about. So what would be the futuristic benefit mix? And I am proposing that under compensation, a lot of employers are moving to what they're calling the consolidated pay. So you will see that even pension contributions are based on a consolidated pay as opposed to a basic pay. And in the circle for benefit, there is a whole long list of options that we have. And this is a futuristic platform where we're saying that instead of just giving the traditional pension, healthcare, life insurance, and WIBA, and so on and so forth, now we are introducing new things such as flexible working hours. There are organizations that have even introduced baby care and nursing rooms as part of their benefits platform, and so on and so forth. And you can see that very intentionally, I have put things like Wi-Fi, telecommuting, open, happy working spaces into that circle. The reason being, we are not living in the times that some of these legislations were put in place. We are not living in the early 2000s or early 1980s. We are living in the 21st century, and there are many things that are going to change apart from COVID-19, and we need to start embracing those. Now, in the reward circle, which is the space that allows an employer to say, look, if you are performing very well and you're achieving the targets that we have set for you, then we make this employment relationship more interesting for you. So you can go into the spaces of annual bonuses, even some people call them sport rewards, and share option schemes. And some of the things that I have put there, I have been questioned a lot by employers, like dowry and honeymoon packages. These are the times when we need to start thinking outside the box so that we encourage a relationship of trust rather than a battlefield in the place of work. But now, what has informed this? If you look at this new triangle there, remember the one that I covered earlier was the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Now this one, you can call it the Miriam hierarchy of needs because it's not the Maslow hierarchy of needs. But what has informed this particular triangle is the fact that things are changing. And I guess with the change, employers have got to embrace it. So at the very bottom of that triangle, we're saying that employees are looking at what is basic for them. What is basic for them now is healthcare, housing, food, connectivity. And connectivity, I actually mean having the gadget and having Wi-Fi provided for you. Flexible work, as you can see now, most of us are working from home or our employees are working from home. A social life. I think the Kenyan experience has been very enlightening for most of us. Even when we are being encouraged every day by the government to stay home, you have seen how difficult. I don't know whether to say that we are living in a space of a generation that wouldn't want to stay home, but I guess social life is so important for most of us that we want to go and engage with others, even when we have been told to stay home so that the spread is less and we flatten the curve. And of course, education ranks in there. As you move up that pyramid, there is a fashion, pass, status, address, meaning where you live, having multiple gadgets and holidays. And as you move to the very top of that triangle, then that's when you see that our benefits and the way we craft our rewards needs to address specific needs around celebrity life, family, and adventure. Now, this particular pyramid wasn't just crafted out of somebody sitting at the back and saying, you know what, this is what needs to happen. It's actually surveys that have been conducted within the East Africa region, and employees have given this particular feedback, meaning this is what they expect in terms of benefits and rewards and compensation going into the future. As I said, this is a presentation I did 4 years ago to an organization, meaning that future already arrived 4 years ago. We are just in a space of COVID-19, which has probably brought back the conversation because we are under pressure. But actually, we reached there a long time ago. Now, what does that make? What is the paradigm shift for an employer? I have covered just a little bit of this, and I know there'll be possibly questions around this. But from where I sit, I am seeing that employers will need to enter into a space of really rethinking about the relevance of the policies they have on board. They also really have to think about the decision-making organs within the organization and how efficient those decision-making organs are. Now, when Mr. Nyakundi was speaking, he did allude to the fact that something like the Retirement Benefits Authority and the trustees can actually go into conversation and make some amendments or propose some changes to how we handle pension schemes. But how soon, how quickly, how efficient are those decision-making organs? I think this is a good time for employers to actually think about how we are structuring these decision-making organs. I think this is also a very good space for employers to think about compliance. I think it's a big thing. And the reason why we turn employer-employee relationship into a battlefield is mainly because we are not complying. And when we are not complying, it obviously becomes a cat and mouse game, which is not a good situation to be in. So this is a good time when employers should really think about, are we complying with the legislations that have been put out there? And what are the lobby forums that we should be looking to talk to, so that if we are uncomfortable with certain decisions or certain pieces of legislation, what is the way forward? How can we address those? This is also a time that employers should be thinking how to do more with less. I mean, every shilling that we have has got to be stretched in a way that we accommodate some of the basic necessities, the high priorities. Remember, we're in a space where there are too many competing priorities. We have got contracts to fulfill, we've got suppliers, we've got other stakeholders who are looking into the income or the revenues that we have as a company. So there are too many competing priorities now, and most of these things are governed by law. So, and we do not want to be in a space of non-compliance. So we should be thinking about how do we stretch our shilling so that we achieve more with less. And so this encourages us to think about how do we move from putting everything as a benefit and moving it towards the space of a reward, so that we are telling employees that, you get to earn XYZ when you perform to this level. So there needs to be a relationship between performance and reward. I'm also thinking that in terms of the paradigm shift, building solid client relationship and building a value-driven stakeholder relationship will be very important for employers. So we're in a space where the shilling is stretched. So who do you pay first? Do you pay your employees first? Do you pay your suppliers first? Do you pay for the services first? Do you pay your office rent? So there's too many competing priorities. This is a space where, as I say, rather than deal with it as a battlefield, let us enter into this relationship as a trust relationship, and a relationship guided by principles of, patience. Now, in terms of an employee, the paradigm shift, and I think this is where I would like to lay a bit more emphasis, because sometimes I get the feeling that we employees put a lot of, we throw ourselves into the hands of an employer, and we say, you know what, I'm an employee, and so I expect my employer to do everything for me. So I want to challenge us, employees. Going into the future, we need to think about multi-skilling, because guess what? Post-COVID-19, employers have learned a lot of things. Business owners have learned a lot of things in this space of COVID-19. I mean, people are working from home. We are working with leaner teams. And the business people are thinking really hard about how to restructure their businesses. So you need to, as an employee, you need to be thinking about how to be multi-skilled and the value that you bring to your employer. You need to be in that mode of continuous learning. It is not enough to say that, you know what, I'm a qualified accountant and that's what I do and that's what I know best. It's not enough. It is not enough to display papers of technical ability. It is a time and a space where we need to enter in what we are calling the top soft skills, which include creativity, high emotional intelligence, decision-making, people management, critical thinking, cognitive flexibility, service orientation, complex problem solving, and scenario planning. And these things are not taught in school. There are no schools that teach us to become creative. There are no schools that teach you to become good in scenario planning or even to solve complex problems. This is out of your own, personal investment that you have to make as an employee and say, you know what, going into the future, my employer will not only be looking for my professional papers, but they'll also be looking at who is more agile in terms of, as an employee, who can do more than just one job. And in case of a similar situation like we're experiencing now with COVID-19 or with the floods or with the locusts, this is the person who can be most agile to handle more than one or two responsibilities going forward. So I think those are things that we should be thinking about. Now, Bansi, just to highlight these slides very quickly, and hopefully I'll have enough time for them. Now, what your benefit mix must be addressing are things that are already known. They should be addressing 5 things, and these 5 things revolve around certainty, uncertainty, significance, love and connection, growth and contribution. Now, I keep saying that HR, the H in human is very intentional. That H needs to be taken care of. This is the time that it needs to be taken care of. I tell people that it is in time of problems and difficulties that people know that you are a true leader, or that people know that the relationship we have is a relationship of trust. So in terms of certainty, we are saying that every human being wants to feel secure to survive. And this is the space that employees are in right now. And I bet even employers are in this space. And I have gone ahead and even proposed some of the considerations in terms of benefits that employers should be thinking about now. Having a pension, I'm sorry for that typo, a home ownership plan. I am glad that now the Retirement Benefit Authority has put forward that law that is redefining our pension in such a way that employees can actually think about owning a home using their pension saving. I just hope that it will be properly guided so that we don't see an outflow that is going into other uses other than what it was meant for. Education plans, and enabling people to walk away from what we knew as our places of work. Flexibility, allowing people to also have access to meals on e-wallets. Remember, we are talking about the basic needs, and one of them is food. So we are thinking for us to remain certain and to address this need of certainty, then employers and employees together need to come to the table and really have a conversation about how to move their benefits from a traditional mix to a futuristic mix that looks at these possibilities. In terms of uncertainty, we are living in very uncertain times. And my take is that COVID-19 is just one of them. I think there'll be many others. I am not predicting doom, but I think there'll be many others in the future. But every human being needs a fire that gets them out of their comfort zone. That's my take. And so in these times of COVID-19 especially, everybody is worried about their healthcare. They're now thinking about, okay, so what's that medical? Even those of us who didn't know that our medical cover was up to say something like 500,000. Now we are going into those policy documents and rereading them and wanting to understand what are the exclusions and what would be included. We are thinking about domestic packages because look, there'll be floods and perhaps a lot of things that are in your homes will be taken away. How does has the insurance even thought about such things? Those are acts of God, but are they covered in our current insurance? Those are certain conversations that need to happen now. Retrenchment, this is going to happen. It's been happening already. The last 3 years, this country has experienced massive retrenchment. And I think it's going to continue. In fact, this situation we are in right now is opening new conversations that's going to take employers to another level of thinking about retrenchment into the future. So what should be thinking about and bringing to the table is, are there plans? Are there insurance plans, for example, that look at after retrenchment? Question for us. A lucrative bonus reward scheme for exceptional performance. I think I've talked that in the previous slide, so I won't go into that. Think about significance. Now, the employee of today, and this is something I keep reminding employers, we are employing who we call the Gen Y and the millennials. And I think also the Gen Z has come into employment. I tend to be very big on this conversation, so if I go into too much detail, please stop me. But it then tells us if the people we are employing now are guys who don't value what we thought was very important as a traditional mix of benefits, then so be it. We need to come to the table and think if what they value most is a flexible work schedule, so be it. Let's put together policies that govern that. Let's not be stuck to the traditional mix that says people have to report to work at 8 o'clock and indeed even use their thumbs to clock in and clock out so that we are sure everybody actually came to work. Because you know what? The generation that we are living with today can very well come and clock in and they will spend the entire day watching a movie on the screen. And there is nothing as an employer you will do. As long as they clocked in, they have worked. So we need to be very careful. So think about their comfort on nursing. They are nursing babies. What's the comfort that we are providing them as employers? The baby care, if we can afford it. I'm sure that some of these things will not be affordable for all the employers, but it's conversation that we need to have. Let's not bury our heads under the sand and think that these are not things that employees are not thinking about. Think about telecommuting so that people don't feel that I have to come to a particular desk and be logged in to work. Now we need to think about love and connection. This is the other big thing that benefits need to address. So whether you like it or not, naturally, every human being needs to feel loved and to feel connected. And some of the things that we bring on board here that you can consider as employers are welfare plans, bereavement support, last expense, insurance for gadgets. These are things that suggest that we are not just concerned about you coming to deliver as an employee to work, but we are also concerned about the things that you value at a personal level. And finally, we talk about growth and contribution. So the kind of generation we are living in today people want to be recognized for a contribution. Actually, a lot of young people want to say, I want to be involved in decision making and I want to grow in this organization. But how do you encourage that? You need to have policies that encourage people to do that. And you should consider allowing these guys to go through education, professional certification, financial literacy. I'm actually very happy to hear that the person coming to speak after me is speaking about investments. So these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as employees and as employers to bring on board as benefits that speak about a future mix. And as I said, that future is now. It is not a future of 2021 or 2022. It is a future that started almost 5 years ago.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think that's the end of my presentation. I know I will have a flurry of questions.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. And I've already seen a few questions on the Q&A platform. I'll ask you two for now because of time, and then maybe we can tackle the next at the end of the webinar. So Kimiti Wanjaria says that you share the hierarchy of needs. So is it based on job level or can it work for all levels? And also you mentioned something about the different generations. Does it work for all generations or do you need a different hierarchy of needs for each generation in the workforce? And then someone asks that should training be a reward? It's there for you to be able to better manage your role and execute your role. So why is it being treated as a reward? So maybe you can answer those two questions and then we'll move over to the last presentation.
Okay, so I'll tackle the first one first, the one on hierarchy of needs. So as I said, the traditional mix, which was the Maslow hierarchy of needs, by the way, nothing has, I'm not suggesting that has changed. I'm just saying that, moving into the future, we need to stop being stuck because the reality of today's needs is that we don't always, the younger generation that is below 40 years does not always value something like food, water, and shelter as the most important thing in their lives today. Some of them will tell you that what they value most is perhaps owning a car. And we have had this. I have had this conversation with a lot of employers when we do surveys, and they get shocked to learn that, we have been giving people bonuses at the end of the year, and lo and behold, people don't value those bonuses. They want instant rewards. Don't keep for me a bonus until the end of the year. Why are you keeping it until the end of the year? If I do something good on month 1, on month 2, please pay me so that I go and do what I need to do right now. So I think it really varies from one generation to another, which is why we need to come to the table and really build policies that will accommodate, because at the moment we have 5 generations at work. So we can't completely do away with the traditional mix. We just have to come to the table and say, look, because now we have a transitional stage where we have 5 generations at work, how do we accommodate that in our policies? Okay. Now, on the second question, I think it was about training.
Yes. Is it a reward? Because
a reward
it's there to help you execute your role.
So now, unfortunately, I want to revert back. So usually when I get confronted by this question, I quickly go back to the Employment Act. There's nowhere in the Employment Act an employer is required. There is no such requirement in law unless I'm otherwise guided by Mr. Nyakundi. There's no such other requirement that an employer needs to take you to school, which is technically why it becomes a reward rather than a requirement or an obligation by an employer. So when an employer actually takes you to school and takes you for training, professional qualifications, or even pays for your master's degree, it's actually a reward. It's really a benefit that you don't quite deserve it, but the employer recognizes that, guess what? For this work to be performed in a particular way, I'd be happy that you have certain qualifications, but there is no such requirement in law.
Okay, thank you so much, Miriam. That was very insightful and interesting. I will pick up the rest of the questions at the end of the webinar due to time constraints. I'd like to therefore introduce our last speaker. We have Mr. Anthony Mwithiga, Anthony is a Chief Executive Officer of ABSA Asset Management Limited. He's also an accomplished investment management professional with over 20 years experience in fund management across East Africa. He's been involved in the active management of multi-asset class investment portfolios of pension funds, insurance funds, units trusts, and high net worth individuals. Anthony is a full member of ICFA and has a postgraduate qualifications in economics, finance, and executive leadership. Anthony, you may say hi as I share your presentation. We are running a bit behind on time, so I'll request that if we can keep the presentation short so that we are able to answer as many questions as possible. Anthony, over to you. Anthony, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you. And welcome to the next session where we talk about investment in these uncertain times. But we look forward to the completion of the current pandemic and the opportunities it brings for all of us. So let's proceed. So as all of you know, ABSA Asset Management is an asset management company managing investment and part of the ABSA Bank in Kenya. So I'll briefly take you through our presentation today, and I will start with what's happening on the various asset classes, where as pension funds, as trustees, we are always engaged on what to expect and how to invest. So very quickly, in what has happened in the fixed income market, this is the investment area where, as pension schemes or pension funds, we invest in anything which pays interest as a return or as a measure of return. These are in otherwise called interest-bearing assets, whether they are corporate bonds, government bonds, treasury bills, bank deposits, and the rest. And the message there is that we've seen already an expectation of a slightly upside in interest rates, and that the impact that will have for our current holdings or your current holdings at trustees and pension schemes is that historical holdings might slightly lose value because of a heightened increase in interest rates. But the opportunities, and we'll discuss about those. And one of the opportunities we've seen that is there's a heightened increase in the secondary market for pension schemes trying to buy shorter term bonds to take advantage of the rising interest rates. On equities or shares, this is the worry to every trustee or every pension member. And in uncertain times, when the economy is weak, when companies are reducing the activity and are doing layoffs, the stock exchange brings a lot of volatility. But I want to say that in these uncertain times, where there's extreme volatility in the capital markets, specifically the shares market, it's sometimes not a bad thing. So volatility also brings opportunities. If you look at that slide on share market, we had a very good year. There was a very good year in the share market in 2019, almost 19% return. Then all of a sudden we jump into 2020. Only the first quarter, the market has lost almost 20%. Now that is the volatility which we are used to. We shouldn't be scared about it, but because it also offers opportunities for further buying. And then we should always bear in mind that investing in shares is a long-term opportunity or a long-term engagement, and markets will come up and down. For example, for the last 3 years, we've had, if you look at 2017, 2018, and 2019, we had 2 positive years and 1 negative year, but the resulting number is positive. It's like 47 minus 18%. So it's still positive for over a 3-year period. and we shouldn't be very worried about that. But I'll speak about it more on the closing strategy slide. Let's move on. The offshore markets always remain out there. We must admit, as pension schemes and trustees, we've not invested heavily in the offshore markets for obvious reasons. One, we don't understand them very much as trustees. Secondly, we still continue to have strong local opportunities. And thirdly, we sometimes don't see the sense of exposure to a foreign currency or a stronger currency, because our obligations as pension schemes to members are in Kenyan shillings. But we should always be aware that there is always opportunity there. These offshore markets have experienced what we've seen locally, heavy volatility, and that volatility has brought about some opportunities. But again, in the strategy ahead, I'll talk about what opportunities we see in the offshore markets. Let's proceed. In the real estate space or property, I mean, this is by no choice, or it remains a darling from individual level and up to pension schemes level. And we must admit, currently, our property market in Kenya has brought out the full spectrum of the opportunities there, which we show them there as office building, hospitality, implying hotels, residential implying houses, retail implying malls on shopping centers, industrial meaning go down, and land just as we know it. So 3 things you need to take home from a property perspective. 1, we are still going through a depressed property market. 2, the pockets of opportunities have thinned from historical sectors of opportunity, like office space. And thirdly, new emergent sectors are offering opportunity, especially industrial, through warehouse and go downs, to support the new online shopping spree and e-commerce, which is replacing a shop with a warehouse. And on the residential side, everyone, I'm sure, who is a big owner of properties as a pension scheme is worried about buildings or offices you own, and now everyone is working from home. So the real estate sector will really undergo a reorganization in the coming months and years. So what are the opportunities which are out there post-COVID? And I'm very glad that we are speaking about post-COVID. It shows the forward-looking of us as trustees, as members of pension schemes, as service providers in the retirement sector, because somehow we'll have to have a post-COVID environment. Whether this post-COVID environment will be by learning to live with the pandemic, or leaving the pandemic behind us through a healthcare or medical solution. So I'll run through the main asset classes just to pick out an opportunity in every asset class. In the fixed income space, where we have corporate bonds, treasury bonds, and other interest-paying assets, the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, lies in the short end. In the short end means shorter term, quickly maturing treasury bonds and bills of less than 5 or 3 years will show more higher yields. And secondly, schemes or pension funds should be out there actively using their fund managers to see secondary trading opportunities where holders of some of these bonds will want to sell desperately to show up their liquidity level and pick up those securities and take advantage of the current environment. On shares, I must admit the share market sounds scary for everyone today. The close to 50% size of the stock exchange here via Safaricom. Today there was results of the Safaricom business, which is a huge beneficiary of past and present opportunities brought about by COVID. Good results again, but the point here is the current volatility should not scare us. There are opportunities of companies with strong fundamentals for us to pick, or for a scheme or a pension fund to pick selective stocks which still continue to have a strong growth story, both through earnings and dividends. On offshore, this remains a big topic and discussion for trustees, especially why offshore and we have everything in Kenya. So offshore will either remain a diversification or a hedge. The current opportunity we see for offshore is mainly through currency, not necessarily through sending money out of the country. So for example, if you look at the Kenya Eurobond, there is an opportunity for a pension scheme to still buy a security issued by the government of Kenya, but in a foreign currency, which is dollars, and then you get benefit of the returns from that bond and any return from the movement of the currency as it adjusts itself to the current scenario through unexpected or continuous weakening. But that is an opportunity which is available there, and these bonds, though listed internationally, are available locally. I've spoken a lot about the property space, and I don't want to repeat myself. The key opportunities there remains currently, especially for medium-sized to higher to larger pension schemes in logistics and warehousing. You know, historically, pension funds have invested in property because pension funds are owned by human beings. Members are human beings, and the first thing a human being wants is housing. So residential projects have been the darling of pension schemes, but we must admit that rental yields on the residential space continue to drag even fixed income securities with the yields of between 5 and 7% on rental yields. But opportunities also are still there in the housing space, specifically in low-cost housing. Low-cost housing is almost a cliche, but it's possible with the right partners and with the right strategy. Private equity remains an opportunity for pension schemes, and most of you refer to as an alternative asset class. Yes, it's a tough one, but we are fortunate in Kenya and in East Africa to have some private equity funds which have exposure to businesses which will benefit from the current COVID environment. So it's good to look out for private equity funds with exposure to healthcare, especially pharmaceuticals and diagnostic businesses, and then thirdly, it's good to look at private equity firms with a track record of exit and a good performance. Then lastly, there should always be a thought of what other assets other than all the ones normally prescribed. If you look at the Retirement Benefits Authority investment guidelines, they always provide an opportunity for any other asset which you think is safe, has a good return, and even the RBA can give an approval of it. Currently, we must admit it's good to look at assets which their returns are not directly correlated to the positive fortunes of economies. We also need to look at assets which retain value and even rise, even though the economy is struggling. Currently, internationally and locally, that opportunity unfortunately remains in a single asset class called gold. We should now realize that even in the local market, we have a gold listed security through an ETF. So that can be an opportunity for pension schemes to think like more of an hedge against performance of other asset classes, and also slightly against the Kenyan shillings. Thank you. I think I will stop there and hand it back over to Pansy.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much, Anthony. I think your presentation was very short and sweet. I'll request the participants, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function to ask your question, or you may write it under the Q&A. Also, a reminder, I see Dominic is asking, we will send you all the presentations so that you can make reference to them later on. Just a second as I change the presentation. So any questions? I'll give 2 or 3 participants an opportunity to ask a question before we close. We are slightly behind time. I request you to just indulge us for a few more minutes. Felista, I see your hand. Please unmute your speaker and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you for that very interesting presentation. But you know, now I'm thinking post-COVID, pension schemes will be looking for quick recovery. And I'm wondering what Mr. Mwidhike would tell us. What would be the options for a quick recovery of the pension schemes? Especially some will go very low because maybe because of the kind of business they're in. Just to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Should I proceed answering that?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Felista. I mean, I like the word you've used, quick recovery. I think
Yes.
that, including medically. One of the realities which we have to live with is that investment opportunities also have to respect the recovery of the economic environment. So to a large extent, there isn't a silver bullet of a quick recovery. I think the most important part is to position a pension schemes portfolio not to get a big hit from the current volatility and slowdown and a delayed recovery. You know, sometimes break even is better than a loss. So the quick recovery is not a guarantee. And again, given the risk profile of pension funds, the opportunities which can offer quick recovery might be a bit riskier than what we would advise pension schemes to invest, especially more riskier interest-bearing assets in the corporate space, or increasing your exposure to a market which might pick very fast, like the shares market. So I would call more for caution, because that caution will cement the pension scheme portfolio to enjoy the recovery, other than trying to stage manage a quick recovery.
It's you, Master. Thank you, Anthony. I don't see any more questions, but please feel free to continue sending them in, and we'll answer them even after the webinar. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Lydia, who will quickly take us through a very short overview, and then we'll end the webinar. Lydia, if you may go ahead.
Maybe as Lydia comes on, thank you so much, Anthony. Great presentation, straight to the point. Miriam, we appreciate a great presentation, and Opa, and also Mr. Nyakundi. Thank you for all the participants who have joined in today, and our commitment to all our clients and stakeholders in the industry is to continue engaging you with the very high level technical experienced service providers and colleagues in the industry to share relevant information that can help you navigate through COVID-19 situation effectively. My quick takeaway from Miriam, and I think Anthony, is there will be need for a lot of innovation in the space of employee benefits design, particularly when we give a promise to an employee in terms of a benefit, but we would also need them to have underlying assets that back up that promise. Definitely there's going to be a holistic review, right from the legislative framework, policy framework, technology framework, even in terms of knowledge that is aligned to the new reality, so that we remain relevant in the present times and also into the foreseeable future. I'm sure this is just a start of these conversations. I definitely would want to pursue a lot more in the area of the new norm in the space of employee benefits, to see how we can innovate and respond appropriately to the opportunities arising into the future. Thank you. Over to you, Lydia. I hope, Lydia, you're ready now.
Yes, I am ready. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's presented. Your presentations are quite insightful. Also, I saw a post a couple of weeks ago that captured my attention, and it said that the current lockdown may actually, that the current lockdown is how retirement may end up being like. No cash, no friends, and no friends around, lots of free time, anxiety, and village people treating you like a suspect. And it was hashtagging that you need to save for retirement, yeah? And so for you to save for retirement, we figured you need a home, you need a channel, you need a place to do that. And NWealth is the place for you to do that, because we, as you see on the screen, that we live for the promise of a better tomorrow. So our vision is a dignified retirement life for all. And our mission is enriching lives through innovative social security financial services. And we achieve this through innovation, through excellence, through doing our work with much fun, and also trust. And these are basically values that are grounded in Christian faith. Also, the way we are structured, we have 3 subsidiaries. That is NWealth Insurance Brokerage Limited, and we also have NWealth Uganda and NWealth Mauritius. So if you're planning to have more than one home, maybe you want to stay in Uganda, also want to stay in Mauritius, we can still be with you. We are there for you. So our statistics at a glance, we've been in operation for the last 10 years. And we have 40 staff. They are well equipped. They have a wide range of professional specialties. Our assets are 620 million, not shillings, but actually dollars. If you try and do the conversion into shillings, it's quite an amount. Also, we are in 3 countries, as I've stated previously, and professional indemnity, meaning our insurance cover, is $1 million, and we are serving about 50,000 members currently, as it is. So these are our contacts. We are located on we're located along Gong Road on Morningside Office Park. And you can come visit us, but not during this time. We encourage that you call us or you email us, and we can be sure to set up a meeting with you through this interesting technology like Zoom. So thank you so much for each one of us who has managed to attend this.
All right. Thank you, Lydia. As we come to an end, I'd like to share with you a poll. Please give us your feedback. It should appear on your screen. Given today's experience, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? We'd like to know how we can serve you better. As I mentioned, all the presentations will be shared back to you on email, and we'll also share the video. And we also intend to keep on doing this every week. So please keep tuned. Next week we'll have our fourth webinar, where we'll get to learn more and engage. So thank you.
And once they can invite a friend.
Yes.
Sometime next week, same time, we will also be having some conversations, same channel, and we are going to send you a link. And you can block that time and also invite a friend. We promise you a quality of engagements and relevant information. Thank you.
Thank you. So please do have yourself a good day. Thank you for joining us. And once you fill in the poll, please feel free to leave the webinar.